This is John McClain. This is Paul Kuharsky from ESPN.com, JY Sports. Welcome to Two-Tone Crew right here on TitansReport.com.
Your source for Titans and pro football talk. This is the Two-Tone Crew on TitansReport.com.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 77 of the Two-Tone Crew. Yes, we are still doing these things, and we do still exist. It's been a while, but that means we have even more to talk about than normal. I'm John Boy, and this is the official podcast of TitansReport.com. Joining me tonight, the reluctant giver of tacos himself, Josh. Welcome.
John Boy, man, you're still good at this.
Somehow it's just like riding a bike, you know. We just got to get back on and go right back at it. Also joining us, the one and only Jamal.
Thank God. There's only one of me.
That's right. There's definitely only one Jamal. At least Jamal-isms, that is. So, guys, it's been a while since we've done one, as we said in the opening. If this is your first time joining us, we've been trying the past couple times that we've done an episode to do live editions. So if you're joining us live, thank you. And if you're listening to us after the fact, go ahead and give us a follow on Twitter at Titans Report. And if you ever want to hop on one of these live and submit questions as we're going, you can do that there. If not, you can just find us through iTunes or whatever podcast source you prefer. So throughout the season, this is a weekly podcast where we come to you with everything Titans, and we try to break down the game, preview the next game, and then just talk about the general news surrounding the team. So right now, of course, you know, the draft is complete, the free agency period's over, all the signings have taken place, training camp underway, and preseason underway. We just saw the new Titans in action for the first time. So as you can imagine, that's going to be the major source of our discussion for tonight. So guys, since it's been so long since we've done this, I just kind of want to go around and get your sort of general feel for this team, because for me personally, it's been a hard one to kind of get a handle on, because usually going into a season, you have a pretty good idea, a pretty good expectation for how that season's going to turn out. This year, I'm not sure whether to get excited or to be terrified, and it's just... And I don't know that the first preseason game did anything to address that at all, for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. But for me right now, I think it's still a big question mark. And I just, anytime I start to lean one way, then I talk myself out of that and think, no, you're crazy for thinking this. And that's unusual. Usually I'm able to make a pretty good guess, at least, as to where I think the team's headed. But this year it's just such an enigma, even more so than normal, at least for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, having the new coach, having new offensive system, defensive system, you don't quite know what players that maybe had some favor with the last staff are going to have less favor with this one, or vice versa. I mean, there's a lot that it's hard to read, and then, yeah, when you have a preseason game that basically is the most boring preseason game in the history of football, and you actually, basically, I came away from it thinking, okay, now I know nothing. It's really hard to get a feel. So I'm excited for tomorrow. I'm excited for the second preseason game.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you kind of have, going into this thing, you have a new coach, and you've seen the system in the past, but I mean, you also have, you know, a new running back, you know, and you really don't know how that whole thing's going to shake out. You know, you get the feeling it's going to be a rotation. You kind of seen a little bit of these guys, and all three of the top guys kind of, you know, did a little something you liked. I think Sankey kind of showed a little bit more all around, but, you know, it's a preseason game, and you can't really tell a whole lot by that. But,
right.
I mean,
a preseason game where it came the biggest downpour that I've ever seen at LP Field. I don't know about you guys, but I don't recall a time where it rained that hard for that
not during
long.
a game, anyway.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was just... It was unlike anything I've ever seen, like I said, in LP Field. And a lot of times if you hear someone say that, you think, oh, that's just an excuse. No, I mean, it was, if you somehow didn't watch the game and you're listening to this, it was a torrential downpour. I think every one of our quarterbacks fumbled at least once.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that I think the Packers had at least one fumble as well. It was just like Jamal said, I mean, a sloppy game all the way around. If you really looked for things, you could find a few things to sort of make you, go one way or another. But for the most part, it was very hard to tell. Quarterback-wise, I guess we can start there because I think that's, if you want to hear our Jake Locker discussion, you can just rewind back to last year at this time because it's basically going to be the exact same thing. I think last year we said it was a do or die upcoming year for him, and the injury kind of threw that off, and I think bought him a little more time. They didn't pick up the option, so this really is the do or die year for Jake Locker, and I think those question marks that we have for the team, a lot of them sort of rest on his shoulders and how he's going to perform. And again, we have to temper all this through the terrible rain, but nothing from Jake Locker in his limited action made me feel any better. I'll say that much about where he's at.
Well, I mean,
you'd have to be like the poster on the forums, Tim. You'd have to have an opinion like that guy of Jake Locker to actually feel better after that game.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think he for one it was raining like crazy, and then two, I mean, he really didn't throw the ball but a couple times. So, I mean, you really can't tell anything at all. But I mean, it kind of goes back to you've seen what he could do last season. You're hearing things in training camp that sound pretty much a lot like what you heard last season. And you saw Whitehurst get in the game and actually play pretty well in the same system. And then Mettenberger came in. Of course, he's playing against the backups, but Mettenberger didn't look bad either. We'll get to him later, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. So as we go through this, we might take a few calls. I think we got a Twitter question or two that we're going to attempt to tackle. But yeah, I mean, Locker didn't do a lot, at all. He only had, I think, 2 pass attempts, and there was actually 3 if you count the penalty, and completed 1 for 5 yards. So, I mean, there just really wasn't a lot there. Did have the fumble. Again, the weather, I think, a huge factor there. So Whitehurst comes in, and I think he was probably the one that a lot of us fans were interested to see because I know all 3 of us on this podcast were very apprehensive about that signing, and I wouldn't say this totally erases that apprehension, but it at least showed me that, this guy, he's not terrible. He can play. I mean, he knows the system, which is why they brought him in, and he put that on display. Threw for 94 yards, had a touchdown, no interceptions, and just had the highlight reel play when he, was doing his best Brett Favre impression out there of just scrambling all over and then completing the pass to Sankey. So pleasantly surprised with that. He battled the rain and did well. I don't know that there's really anything from him. It went about as well as it could have, to be honest. He even had 2 passes, I think, that were dropped, which could have very easily been caught. So Whitehurst so far looking good. Again, preseason game, so we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with him, I had concerns about him, and my concerns were basically that he's totally pathetic, and why the heck is he on the team, right? So he goes out there, and at least I think it evidenced why he's on the team. People have success in the preseason, and that doesn't mean that they're going to have success in the regular season. He had success, but I think what it showed is that he's comfortable in the system. And I think that as we've gone further into this process, the reason they brought him in is partly to be a coach on the field and in practices and different things when coaches couldn't be around early on. And then he's also a guy who, worst comes to worst, he knows the system well. You're not throwing another guy out there who may be a bad quarterback and doesn't know the system. So you get at least it raises the floor for your backup quarterback, I think. And at least for me, I had very low expectations. And so seeing him do pretty well out there, I kind of came away. I mean, I'm not happy about our quarterback situation, and that primarily has to do with the guy at the top. But I'm less concerned about our backup, and I guess part of that also has to do with how bad Ryan Fitzpatrick did in the Houston game.
Yeah, that was probably the best thing to come out of the preseason is just how that first week is how bad the Texans looked.
Yeah, and going back to Whitehurst, I think we were right to. I think everyone was right to kind of like have concerns about that, just because he hasn't done much in the pros, but the guy has talent. I mean, this is somebody that's Seattle traded to. Traded, like, I believe this is a swap seconds and a third round pick or something like that. I mean, with the intention of making him the starter. I mean, so he has talent. He just hasn't done anything with it yet.
Right. And let's go ahead and bring in one of our Twitter questions that we have, because it relates right in line with this, and it's from Frosty Oil on Twitter, and he asked, how far is Mettenberger from being the backup over Whitehurst? And we can talk a little bit about Mettenberger here as well and how he performed. So Mettenberger, I think he was up and down. He started off kind of shaky. He had the fumble, and which was lost to the other team. Then he came back and led us on a game-winning drive and made some. We've all heard about his big arm, and he put that on display. But I think you also have to realize, I don't think it's a stretch to say he arguably went against better competition in college than a large part of what he was seeing there. I mean, this is a guy who played against, the Alabamas, the Floridas, the Georgias, those types of defenses. Right. I mean, yeah, maybe 10 years ago, but yeah. So he went against great defenses week in and week out. So guys who are in the pros now. So he was going against mainly third stringers. Did he make some great throws? Absolutely. Did he give me even more confidence that this isn't just any old 6th-round pick? Yeah, but I think Whitehurst, to Frosty Oil's question, he has the backup position locked. I'm not sure there's anything Mettenberger could do, really, to be honest, to unseat him, because of what we just talked about, him knowing the offense, and that was why he's brought in, to be that coach. I don't know. I mean, you guys agree that there's really, I couldn't see anything that he could do to unseat him, to be honest.
Yeah, no chance. Pretty much the only thing he can do to be the backup quarterback is wait for Jake Locker to get injured. And besides that, he's not going to pass Whitehurst, and he's not going to get any action this year unless either Locker goes down and Whitehurst goes down, or Locker goes down and it's towards the end of the year and we're not in the playoff hunt. Then maybe.
Yeah, there you go. That at the end was my thought. Is I think that if you look at just the psychology of teams and how they try to structure position groups, you've got a developmental guy and you've got a backup who you think can step in and steady the team for a little while at least, to try to limp you into the playoffs or limp you back until your starter is healthy again and he can play. So that's the role Whitehurst is playing. And I don't think that unless Mettenberger is just playing so lights out that it's just impossible to deny how great he is in practice, I think the only time they really turn to him is they say, well, let's see what he has before the end of the year because we're not in the playoff hunt, things like that. I think potentially if Whitehurst comes in as just total crap, then they might look to somebody like Mettenberger. But I think even then, they will hesitate to put him out there until they feel like he's ready. So I think that Mettenberger, it's less about what he does, unless it's just like he's out there in practice looking like Peyton Manning every day.
Right.
Unless he's doing that, I think it's less about him and more about the Titans and/or Whitehurst. So I really don't think that he has much chance of unseating him.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people on Titans Report might not be happy to hear. Well, they could probably care less what I think, but they wouldn't be happy if it was true. What do you guys make of, on TitansReport.com, I'd say it's like 50% of people all of a sudden are just like convinced he's the starter and he's better than Jake, and they're overstating it a little bit just because. However, are you surprised by the hype that he's gotten?
Somewhat. I think it goes back to so much just of us being desperate for a quarterback, and the fact that he was so highly rated before the injury. I think that's the reasoning behind it, and we're just, since Steve McNair, we've been searching for that franchise guy, and there's no doubt that he has the arm and has the physical ability. So I think that's what gets people excited. And so, does it surprise me? Probably a little bit, because I think if you really kind of sit back and look at how the NFL works, you just wouldn't expect him to come in and to be able to win a starting job this year, given how, he's coming off an injury a serious injury, and that he's, he was taken in the 6th round, and he was really the last of the sort of, big name quarterbacks, if you will, to go in the draft. I'm pretty sure. I know he went after McCarron. I know he went after Aaron Murray.
The last one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of those names. So I think the talent's undeniable, and that's what gets people excited. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my best thought on it. Exactly.
You can't help but be excited when you see him play. I mean, he looks the part, but he fell to the 6th round for a reason. Of course, the injury is a big part of that. But regardless of that, he's a rookie. Being drafted late has afforded him the chance to sit down, not to be rushed in, to get healthy. You know what I mean? There's no reason to rush him in right now. I think we're handling it well, and then next year, he'll have a chance to compete, I think.
Yeah. And
it always depends.
There's no denying. You can already see the bond that he has with Taylor Lewan. I mean, just the way they were conversing back and forth on the field, and kind of patting each other on the back, and we know that they've been hanging out a lot off the field. I mean, I could see when people would see that and think, you know what, that might be our future right there, those two guys. But I definitely think it would come next year for all the reasons we've mentioned. I think the most interesting scenario this year, we hope this doesn't happen, but if Locker were to go down again, then you're looking at a number of different scenarios. How are we in the playoff race? Do we have a chance? Do we go to Mettenberger or do we go to Whitehurst? And that probably is going to depend on the record at the time and how serious Jake's injury is. But that, I think Mettenberger would have a chance to start a few games than I do to be the backup, just because of our unique situation. So it'll be interesting to watch. I think that definitely, preseason's hard to watch as it is, but whenever you have a young developmental quarterback, as you pointed out, Jamal, which he is the developmental quarterback now, as we released Tyler Wilson, who was kind of the other guy taking some snaps from him. So Mettenberger is that developmental guy, and it gives you a reason to be excited when you watch preseason. So
I guess it will be fascinating to see how this unfolds in the preseason, because I think that starved for a quarterback mentality, and you've seen a lot of young quarterbacks step up recently, and he looks the part, and you see reports of he's the first guy on the practice field every day, and you see those sorts of things, and just the little excitement that's already there, little in some cases is understated. If Jake Locker has a bad game tomorrow, and Zach Mettenberger gives people reason to get excited again, like, this is just going to grow. This is probably my hope for intrigue and excitement. If nothing else, just to have a storyline. This is the great hope this year, is that if Zach Mettenberger can somehow continue looking good enough and Jake not convincing you quite well enough, it will be an interesting story to watch, just to see how fans react.
Yep. Because they're ready, I think.
Ready, yeah.
A lot of them are on the edge. Some of them have went over the edge. But yeah, so to answer, I think we answered that question, and at least in terms of our opinion. So we'll see how it shakes out. But so yeah, I mean, the other side of the ball, I was honestly probably most disappointed with that, because weather like that traditionally favors the defense, and not even Green Bay's first team offense. It wasn't even Aaron Rodgers out there, and Eddie Lacy wasn't out there either. Just really drove right down the field on our defense, passing, running. I mean, there was really no resistance whatsoever, and you just hope beyond everything that hopefully our defense was just not wanting to get hurt and holding back because of the rain. But whatever it was, they did not look good at all, and even Ray Horton just came right out and said it's unacceptable. And that for me was probably more alarming than even Locker, and it was just very alarming to see that.
Well, I think because the defense carried us last year, and I think that if you were to name who are the players that you truly expect to play well, they're not on offense. They're mostly defenders, and they're mostly. You don't think so?
No, if I'm saying who I think will play well, I think we're still talking about Roos. I think we're still talking about Kendall Wright. Yeah.
And then.
And then it's a lot of hope. You hope Justin Henry can step up. You hope Sankey can play well.
Defensively, who would we say? We'd say McCourty,
Jarrell Casey.
Pollard. Yeah, Casey for sure. Pollard's probably up there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Griffin.
Yeah, I think so. I think that it also depends on situationally how some of those guys do. I mean, you're not going to say that that all of those guys are every down players, but some of them can step up in certain situations. But yeah, I mean, the defense last year carried us, and so to see the defense just kind of get pushed around, it's concerning for sure. And I think that then you also have players like Zach Brown, who, at least for me, the fact that he's getting badmouthed again and getting suspended again, or I guess not suspended necessarily, but didn't start because of a personality thing and a breaking a rule. I mean, these sorts of things are just really concerning for me.
And I got to give you credit on that one, Jamal. You called that one last year. Let me go ahead and just puff you up a little bit more.
I don't need the help.
No, because last year, I mean, everyone was against, Munchak. He was the easy target. And even I, just thought, because we had seen how well Zach Brown had played, And so when all that news came out about Munchak disciplining him, it was very easy to take the player's side. And now here we see this carrying over with a new staff, which validates Munchak and really makes you wonder just what in the world is going on with Zach Brown. And, Wisenhunt, called him out blatantly in the media, by name, letting him know how disappointed and upset he is about this. And it's just, we still don't know what the rule is that he broke. But, this is a guy that, going back to the draft, Cyrus on this, of TitansReport.com on this podcast talked about how he did not want us to draft Zach Brown, and I think he kind of convinced all of us of that as well. And then we drafted him, and he looked good for a while, or for a little bit, I should say, and now we're starting to see more of these issues. So, I don't mean to derail it and talk too much about him, but it's just that's definitely a cause for concern, and that's
a clear pattern at this point, for sure.
Right. And is this their last? Is that Wisenhunt's last ditch effort to say, all right, this is it? Either get on track or we're moving on.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to know. I'd be remiss if I didn't say, or at least point out that technically I don't think it was Munchak who disciplined Brown. He's the one who said, I have no idea what happened.
That's right. Yeah, he did.
And so it was more the defense, and if you look at it, it was probably Greg Williams' influence more than anything. But yeah, I think definitely, you start getting to a point where people are disappointed with the coach, disappointed with results, and you start looking at the linebacker coach and you have some questions about his credentials, and it's very easy to start saying, well, maybe it's their fault and not the players. But not only was Wisenhunt, didn't start Zach Brown this week, but he came in the door and basically out the gate started talking about Zach Brown and said that at the beginning of team activities this year, Zach Brown, it was starting to come out again, and that some of the players in the locker room had to step in. This will all mean nothing if Zach Brown goes into the year and plays well. Right. It will all mean nothing. But at this point, he hasn't really played well of late, and you can see that. I think the level of focus they're putting on it, and as vocal as they are, I think it's a pretty big issue with them, and that is just very concerning.
Yeah. But back on Monday, he was back running with the first team.
Right.
That's right, yeah. Well, because who else, if you're the coach, you got to try to take steps to get attitudes in line, but then what? If he's still your best option, he's still your best option.
That's the thing. They really need him for the switch to the 3-4. They really need him.
We actually have a Twitter question
exactly,
about that.
Yeah. It's from James Ryan 0203, and he's asking, do we have the personnel to make the switch to the 3-4 defense and to make it work? And if you're just going by that preseason game, you'd say, whoa, maybe not. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's the growing pains. I think when you look at our personnel, the one that, or the few that jump out at you is obviously you've got Wembley, who's played in a 3-4 before, so he's going to be a natural fit, and I think that's why they worked out the agreement they did with him. It doesn't really affect the secondary as much, from my understanding. But then, for the rest, you got a lot of guys shifting around, trying out new roles. Derek Morgan's probably the biggest one, who's going to be standing up now, rushing the passer where he's used to playing on the line. You got Casey moving a little bit. So it's a thing they've got to answer. They signed the linebackers. They signed Phillips. They signed Woodyard, who have experience. And then was there one more that I'm forgetting? They drafted Williamson out of Kentucky. He's a later round pick though for linebacker. You got Zach Brown. You got Akeem Ayers. Akeem Ayers, I think, is probably a fit, but he's not even running with the first team and was even out there with some of the third team, I think.
That's one I was kind of wanting to get into because, I mean, you look at Derek Morgan, and I was really kind of worried about how he would fit into this whole thing, and I thought, okay, this seems like a good change for Ayers. It's been the opposite. Morgan's looked pretty decent.
Yeah, during the game, so right at the beginning of the game, I wasn't home yet, and I had the game on. Fortunately, they were playing Green Bay, so I was able to pull it up on my AM radio and my rusted-out Chevy. And it was actually just a couple plays into the game. Derek Morgan actually looked good enough in coverage that they were commenting on it, on how well the transition seemed to be going. And I think he probably should have had a pick this game as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you never know how it's going to go once you get to live action and teams are scheming and all those sorts of things. But at least like the eye test initially, Derek Morgan does seem to be making that transition. And again, Akeem Ayers. It's fascinating what's happening with these linebackers, where I feel like McCarthy, Ayers, and Brown all flashed potential as rookies, and we all got excited.
They really did.
And we thought, we've got our linebacker core for the next X years. And they're all just question marks at this point. McCarthy, he's probably going to get a settlement and get off the team. I mean, he's going on IR most likely. And, I mean, he's had as many injuries, it seems like, as Jake Locker. And he's going to be gone. It's fascinating to me.
From team captain to, I mean, Wyatt was running those articles about how much better the defense was scoring-wise when he was on the field, and now he's just, like you said, I mean, he's probably done as a Titan. He may be with him this year. I don't know how all the injury stuff will shake out. But, yeah, it's amazing because I completely agree. Even on this, since we've been doing this podcast, I mean, Jamal and I were talking the other day. It's hard to believe this year will mark our third year. We'll hit year 3, our third full year as we go through this season. So, yeah, we've talked about those guys a lot on this show. So, the only other injury, speaking of injuries, the big injury was Chris Spencer, and he's really depth for the offensive line. So you hate to lose your depth, but we didn't lose anyone major on the front lines, but that could definitely affect depth, and I think they signed a few guys this week actually. So
yeah, apparently Levitri was not looking good at center when they played him.
Right. He tried to play a little center. So all right. Well, any other takeaway from the preseason game? I've got one final one that I just thought of, and that is Rob Baronis. Can we bring him back? Is it too late? No, I mean we gotta be fair. I mean it was heavy rain, as we've said, very hard to kick in, and they are also trying out the new 15-yard whatever. But even from what I'm hearing in practice, both of these guys are just way too shaky for me to feel confident. And I look at who's available. It's like, geez, was Baronis really that bad? Maybe we should look to get him back because it's just, for me, it feels very shaky, and we know how much we've had to rely on the kicker in years past, so I'm uneasy about that position.
I have no confidence in either of these guys.
Okay, we're on the same page.
Yeah. So the thing is, I think it was a good time to move on from Rob Baronis. His production was not on par with his compensation.
The money.
I think if we could bring him back and guarantee that we're never going to have a kick from 40 yards to 49 yards, we might have a chance, because that seemed to be his Achilles heel lately. But the fact of the matter is, it was a good time to move on, and you just question the plan to move on to these guys, because these guys don't seem like the right guys. But I'm not convinced that there's a better option out there. I think there's quite a good chance that kicker will just be a question mark for us this year, and there'll probably be a game or two where we say we should have won that game. The dang kicker lost it for us. Really, I mean, it's not just the dang kicker. It's your team, your team structure, the team planning, decision-making that's going on. It's not just that these two guys were available before. but these are the two options we chose, and now we're stuck with them, I think, because I look at the veteran kickers, and none of those guys excite me.
No.
Are there any other teams who are maybe carrying a couple kickers? Because teams do that. Like
That's what I'm hoping. Yeah.
Yeah, for the preseason, just to kind of not make sure one doesn't get too much work, but maybe at some point somebody will come free. Because for some reason I just don't think one of these guys are going to be our guy going into the season.
I don't either.
Where's that kicker from like Norway or whatever who tried out with the Lions last year? Kickalicious or?
I haven't heard about this.
Yeah, he had a YouTube video. And he was like kicking crazy field goals. He had to try out with the Lions for a decent bit last year, and then he seemed to do okay, but they cut him. Bring him back.
Well, let's go around real quick to kind of wrap up this discussion, and I know we said we'd try to keep it pretty quick tonight, so we'll see what we have left after this, and we haven't touched on nearly every player, so I just wanted to quickly go around and let each one of us pick one player that we haven't already talked about, just to give our quick impression of them in the limited action we saw, and I wanted to talk really quickly about McCluster, because I think he showed quite a bit, for the limited action of running the football and being physical running between the tackles. He had 3 runs for 19 yards, and I think the one that, really caught everybody's attention was when he broke a few tackles and just kept really lowering his head and ramming right through. And that was a big question mark from him, is he going to be just this pass-catching sort of gadget player, or are they legitimately going to use him in the running game a little bit? So I don't know if we all have to go around and talk about him if you guys want to move on to your player, but he's one that I thought we should call some attention to.
No, he's exactly, whenever he said that, he was the first one that came to mind. And I'm the same as you. Kind of wonder.
Stole it.
So how are they going to use him? I mean, is it going to be strictly in rotation, or like you said, is it going to be a gadget player? It's probably going to be a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
But if we're talking about someone that we haven't brought up yet, we've talked about pretty much everyone. I'm going to say Stafford. Stafford, he's apparently had a good camp, and he saw him square up and just deliver a really solid textbook tackle and just depleted a guy. Of course, the rain has something to do with it, but he had another good play in there, and so who knows what could happen to him in the future. But I think that he's kind of emulating a little bit of Pollard's style, and I like that.
Well, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to comment on John's by mentioning another player, which is, in general, I think the running backs overall are an interesting question, because we've got Bishop Sankey. I think he showed some of the versatility that he can bring. I think Tom Gower had a pretty good quote on Twitter. It was something along the lines of, if you are concerned about Sankey getting tackled with little contact, this game does nothing to quell your concerns. It was something along those lines, which, I think he went down pretty easy, but it's a sloppy game. But he showed receiving out of the backfield, that sort of thing. He showed sort of the completeness of his package, if that makes sense. And I think Sean Green's still starting, and he, again, didn't look terrible. So the running back group as a whole, I think, is an interesting question. The player that I'm going to call out, then, this is where I'm cheating. The player I'm going to call out is Taylor Thompson. I thought
that's a good one.
It was interesting how often they went to him. And then after the game, this week they've said a little bit about how they were trying to throw a little bit extra at him and see how he handled it. And I just have this inclination where I've always kind of wondered, Delaney Walker seemed like the type of, I won't call him necessarily a gadget player, but he's more versatile than necessarily a tight end that I would associate with Ken Wisenhunt's style. And I think that Taylor Thompson, the hope and the dream has always been for him to be that, like, he has the athleticism. He could be a true, like, receiving tight end, and he already blocks great. Yeah. And so I just think he's a guy to keep your eye on. And I know Paul Kuharski wrote a little bit of an article about how he solidified his roster spot, that sort of thing. I think the tight end group is an interesting thing with Ken Wisenhunt.
And if you're talking about somebody who's a breakout player this year, everything you're hearing about Justin Hunter and Kendall Wright in practice, I mean, Kendall Wright, he already had his breakout year, but Justin Hunter apparently is having a really good training camp.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think about, I think it was on the Titans Report Twitter account where we had a little bit of a response from some people. Who was it? It was Big Joe on the Go.
Joe Dubin.
Yeah, Joe Dubin basically said, I think that Justin Hunter has said his goal this year is 60 catches, which I have issues with that. I mean, that's just setting your sights low. Maybe he's being realistic, but I like to hear, granted, maybe it's not a great example, but I like to hear a guy saying, I'm going to get 2,000 yards this year. I like confidence. And so he's saying, I'm going to get 60 yards. Okay, well, or 60 catches. Okay, well, yeah, so then 50 is going to be good for you. But Joe Dubin basically said, I expect half of that. And then he went on to say how he quit on routes in college, that sort of thing. Joe Dubin is not high on Justin Hunter.
And speaking of quitting on routes, you kind of heard that again this week with the whole Jag thing. It was basically the same type of thing, right? He didn't run the route correctly.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, you guys can go back to the draft podcast. Josh and I both being, following the University of Tennessee football program. It's always been the question with him is the mind game and the mental aspect of it, because he's always had the physical tools, and I think he even showed that during his rookie year. So, but yeah, he could definitely help Locker out a lot if he turns into what everyone seems to think he can, and clearly the coaches believe in him, or they wouldn't be pushing him this hard and making him wear Jag on the back of his jersey and calling him out. And last year I thought maybe Jefferson he's being a little too hard, but this year I think you see that it's really just because he believes in this guy and sees what he can be, ultimately. So.
Well, and I think that's the thing. I look at it and I say, I kind of try to look at the psychology that they're doing with him, and I think his athletic ability is just so crazy elite.
Yeah.
And it seems like, you hear people talking about maybe effort, maybe focus, that sort of thing. If it's not just like a mental thing in terms of like mental inability, if it's just focus, then there are ways. If they find the right button to push, that's a thing where you can find the right button and turn it on. And you may never find that right button, but it does exist. When it's people who maybe I don't want to say they're just too dumb, but there are players who are just too dumb to get it in a certain way.
Maybe you could mention a previous receiver of ours.
Well, that previous receiver is supposedly the world's greatest thing.
That's right. Haven't we heard that before?
We have. I think 1 year ago we were talking about Kenny Britt is beastly.
He's breaking out.
And now not only is he beastly, but he's a leader. I mean, if that guy's your leader, be concerned, man. But
Jeff Fisher's got the PR machine working. Is what it is.
Jeff Fisher and PR is just amazing. That guy should just quit coaching and tour the country giving seminars on how to work. I don't get it. However,
I just wanted to feel like a winner.
There you go.
Great timing.
Seriously, the thing with Justin is I don't think that he has the intellect issue. I think that there's just something in his brain. I don't know if it's confidence, maybe. There's something where it seems like that's where they're trying to go with it. And so for me, I get excited when I see them still working on it because they haven't given up hope. But at the same time, history is hard to break.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, did you guys want to try and take a few calls, or should we go ahead and try and just wrap this one up for the week? We'll probably be doing one relatively soon again anyway, with the game being tomorrow night. You may even be listening to this on game day because Titans play on Friday evening this week.
Yeah, personally, I think with this past preseason game, it's so hard to take basically anything from it.
I agree.
I think we're much better served watching a real preseason game and then maybe talking a little bit more.
Hopefully with some better weather this time.
Goodness gracious.
And hopefully we'll be more consistent with these. I know we were so very punctual on our time that we signed on. Everything was in Pacific time. So
I just imagine CMJ. I imagine CMJ from the forums having just waited there patiently for 48 hours. 48 hours, he had nothing else to do.
He pretends he doesn't listen. I think he does.
Oh, he absolutely does.
Yeah.
By the way, just so people understand what happened Tuesday night. So we have on my end, I have a pretty complicated setup here that involves a soundboard, a mixer, and mic, and it goes into, and I have and some other things we can take calls that are all kind of wired together. And in the process of setting up what we're about to go live, the soundboard basically blew up the interface, and so that's why we had to give me a day to get a new one.
Sounds like my dog ate all my homework, Guru.
It does.
You were there when it happened, man.
That excuse only works once or twice. I mean, how many grandmas you got? That's the next excuse.
Yeah. So that's it for this episode 77 of the Two Tone Crew, and Josh is the owner, operator, head man, and as I said at the beginning, reluctant giver of tacos over at TitansReport.com. If you have no idea what that is, then you should just sign up for an account and check out Josh's profile, and you might know a little more about that. But Josh, where all else are we on the internet?
Yeah, well, we're all over the internet, John.
That's right.
So we're on Twitter at Titans Report. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Titans Report, because we're big time like that. You can also use our phone-in line. That number escapes me now, but we'll post it in the thread. But yeah, so pretty much that's it, and of course on TitansReport.com.
That's right. And sorry we didn't get to all your questions. I know there was one about which other rookie did we think would make a big impact, so we'll sort of table that one for next time and try and answer it there.
Boom.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening, whether you're live or whether you're listening to the MP3 download of this. Appreciate it. And we will talk to you again soon. Once again, this is John Boy, Jamal, and Josh of Titans Report, and this is the Two Tone Crew.